Hello, everyone. We're starting this webinar by GDI Conseil. GDI Conseil stands for Geopolitics et Développement International. Wars are the rule. Peace is the exception. Peace is the exception. And at GDI Conseil, Geopolitics et Développement International, we are specialized in strategic advisory and foresight. It's a firm that's based in Paris that I have founded. It embraces 20 years of experience working in conflict transformation, institution building, stabilization, development in post-conflict and fragile context, like the Middle East, like the Balkans. I've also developed expertise in governance, justice, security affairs in the Euro-Mediterranean region, which we have specialized in. If you visit or have visited our website, gdi-conseil.eu, you'll notice that the visual identity of GDI Conseil is focusing on the Roman era. You'll find the Roman scriptures, you'll find the Roman Latin expressions, you'll find the Roman etiquette, a timestamp to which we turn to signify that the strategic shift we are presently undergoing has something to do with digging back into ancient history, ancient empires, and especially that empire, the Roman Empire, which happened to encapsulate the entire Euro-Mediterranean region and never really ceased to be a beacon, to be a compass for governing models throughout the centuries. And now it's Washington's turn to dream of what we call Roma Eterna, the eternal city. And these wars that we are noticing are just an utter manifestation we see of these rising ambitions to which the world, and specifically Europe, is not prepared for. Let me introduce the speakers and part of GDI Conseil team. Like I said, they are scattered around the Euro-Mediterranean region. All three of them are presently in Beirut, in Lebanon, which is in a dark place these days. So bear with them if they have connection problems or connection issues. The team is multicultural, multidisciplinary. We are pluricontextual, and all three are research associates with GDI Conseil. We have with us Dr. Elias Dahrouge. He's Hungarian, Lebanese. He's a senior researcher in international affairs. He teaches at St. Joseph University. Jean-Marie Charles is a senior expert in geopolitics and business resilience, also joining us from Beirut. And Fadi Hachem is an expert in international law, namely international human rights law and international humanitarian law. Like you saw in the rationale of this webinar, we're going to be working alongside three different axes in the next hour together before opening for the Q&A for the participants joining us. First of all, we try to look at those conflicts anatomy. What are the actual drivers of the conflict? What are the strategic objectives? How can these confrontations be depicted with regards to the broader power dynamics? This Roma Eterna timestamp we were talking about, especially from a European perspective. What does it actually mean from an international law perspective? So we also delve into the legal aspects of those questions. The second axis will be zooming into the regional aspect of these wars. The Gulf today, under missiles, under unprecedented instability, it's under stress. And so how did it switch from that stability model, from that perfect haven of peace and stability, into what we now see as a systemic risk zone? How are businesses to react under those stress tests in terms of risks, but also in terms of opportunities? That's something we can also discuss with our team and with your questions. And finally, we'll finish the discussion in a third dimension, the system breakdown and the business exposure. What are the risks that we are talking about for the companies, for businesses, for entrepreneurs? What is required today for effective business resilience in Lebanon, the Middle East? Business resilience is a given. It's practically part of the DNA of the region. But for European companies, for extra Middle Eastern companies that have interest in the Gulf, how is this business resilience to be effective? How can you work along in such a fragmented and volatile environment? And so we'll start with our very first question, very first axis, the conflict anatomy, the strategic drivers. We'll ask Elias Dahrouge, how do you see the series of wars, this war in the Gulf? How is it the turning point in today's international order?
Well, first of all, thank you, Karim, and so let me also please welcome everyone who are watching us now and attending this webinar. I will not like depict the picture as it is now because we are all aware. We see in the media what's happening. My my short answer would be somehow around more or less putting it in its context within the literature also of international relations and theories, just to understand a little bit what are we going through. Um, I I firmly believe that this war will be definitely marking the end of an era, as we've seen it already in history in the past few decades. There is a structural change that is ongoing within the world order, and the world order as we knew it, at least since World War II, is will maybe be very much affected after this war. There are many reasons, of course, behind it, but I will just highlight a few. First of all, there is a collapse of traditional diplomacy as we already knew it in the past decades. So beyond and not to be talking about bypassing the international institutions and frameworks as it was already happening. We've seen it, for example, in the Iraqi war, the US war on Iraq in 2003, when they already bypassed, for example, the UN Security Council and they attacked and invaded Iraq. This time, it's also a change of with the Trump administration, especially. We've seen the change of the rule of the games within diplomacy. Of course, we've seen already earlier this year what happened in Venezuela. Um, and also then with the war against Iran. Um, but we are actually back into something that was mainly described by, for example, the realists in international relation theories. So very hard politics, the material power itself, and the collapse of norms as we used to as we were used to, at least as I mentioned, since the Second World War, and the frameworks that were built up after this. And we are maybe back to something more that was happening, for example, in medieval Europe, in the relationships between states. But here, of course, again, we're mainly speaking about the US and this. So what does it mean? It means that military force is again a central tool of great powers, the great power politics, and there is a collapse of a lot of norms and all the habits that were installed within the international norm. The second one that I just want to mention, and I don't want to take too much time here, is the acceleration of the multipolar rivalry. We are definitely seeing the first bigger direct clash. Of course, after Ukraine, what happened, but now it's more within the Middle East with another great power, which is regional power, which is Iran, and which was um, we've seen the last decades how also an Eastern axis was trying to emerge with Russia, China, and other states as well against the Western aligned Middle East that actually had its own architecture. That for the first time we're seeing in work with the Gulf states, of course. Um, there is also one point, which is the militarization of the global economy, which was also always part of the game, of course, but now we've seen it more and more with the weaponization of oil, the asymmetric warfare that Iran is trying to play, which was maybe will be have repercussion maybe more than even the 1973 crash with the blockade of the Hormuz Strait, etc. And finally, this is maybe beyond the international order itself, but it will definitely have an effect on the long term, which is the formation of warfare itself. So we've seen the massive use of drones, missiles, the asymmetric warfare that Iran started to use, the massive bombing that the US and Israel is using also from the other side. Uh, the war, as we all know it, has definitely changed, and I'm sure it will have other kind of impact in the future.
Definitely. Thank you, Elias. You reminded everyone how these wars are pinned to a specific context, an international erosion of the global order that we saw in the Russian aggression to Ukraine. We saw also from the Middle Eastern perspective what happened on the 7th of October, which again is another strategic rift that opened the door for an all-out war by Israel that managed to get the US backing over this. And so as Israel is changing the face of the Middle East, the United States are also using those wars to secure their superiority, their advance, to reposition their interests, to reposition their demands with the rest of the world. And so it's the US first, MAGA, make America great again, and facing that, the rest of the world, China included, China as a strategic and systemic rival, to slow down, if not to crush, when potentially the time comes. And so, like you said, it's back to a logic of state power and absolute sovereignties. And so I turn to Fadi to ask you, what does it mean exactly when it comes to international law? We're talking about erosion of international law. Does it only occur in times of conflicts of war? This is when we remember that international law is something significant to maintain, to preserve. What exactly do we mean by the erosion of international law today?
Thank you, Karim, for the question, and thank you, Elias, for the intervention, because it's exactly what I needed to continue after. When we talk about a conflict, or we talk about international conflicts, and especially when we're talking about the international conflict of today, all the political rules that Elias just laid down to us transition into a frequent question that we always hear. Where is international law? And that's the first question that we always hear every time we have a conflict. Where is international law? We hear that international law is ambiguous, it's unclear, there's a confusion of what does it mean. But there is only one reality to that point, is that the law exists, it's there, and it is very, very clear. The problem is that it's increasingly not being applied. And this is why we are witnessing day after day, conflict after conflict, statement after statement even, when someone goes and says, I want this and I'm going to conquer this. We see that this is where we are witnessing the progressive weakening of the authority, the legitimacy, and the effectiveness of international law. And this is exactly what we call erosion. Erosion occurs when, as international organizations around the world, even the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court and every other legal body that is present there, who are the traditional gatekeepers of that legal system, are perceived as ineffective, while powerful states are free-riding the system at the expense of other states. Actually, the courts are themselves doing their job, but when we have a restraining order, or when we have an arrest warrant, and these are not being applied anywhere around the world, this is where we also talk about the erosion of international law. So today we'll explore what it looks like during this webinar, and how does it translate in practice, and what is the specific impact on the Gulf region. Because no, Karim, this is not limited to this war. And I think Elias already gave multiple examples of this is not the first time where we're seeing international law going into erosion, but it's also affecting wartime and peacetime governance. So we go back when we're talking about the erosion of international law, we go back to the most important challenge ever faced by international law is the legitimacy crisis. International organizations are viewed as ineffective, as politically constrained, and manipulated politically. And whenever we talk and whenever we mention international organizations, the first one that comes to our mind is the Security Council. The Security Council, being the core and the heart of the United Nations system, is a paralyzed council because of the veto power and veto politics and the geopolitical alignments. We could have stopped so many wars. We could have stopped and prevented others. But the veto power and the political power gained in the Security Council is a big problem for the legitimacy of the UN specifically, but the legitimacy of the international law in general. So whenever we are talking about erosion, we are talking about three important dynamics that I would like to highlight that are relevant for this conflict. The first one, as I already mentioned, is the lack of enforcement. The lack of enforcement of international law is the international law as it was conceived for the state to, by their own willingness and by their own participation in that international order, would want to participate and apply the law. So the absence of strong mechanisms means violation occur with so little to no consequence, particularly for powerful states. And not gonna elaborate on this because we're gonna come back to this idea at a later stage. The second most important dynamic of erosion is the double standards of international law. When Russia attacked Ukraine, we have saw the word mobilize, diplomats being kicked out of states, Security Council resolutions, General Assembly statements, UN officials coming out of their offices and saying this is not acceptable. Where was it on October 7th when the conflict happened? Where is it when Iran is being attacked now? Where is it when the Gulf states are being attacked now? So this conflict has been quasi absent from most of the bigger statements that we are usually used to when events of that extent usually happen around the world. So responses for now, as we can define them, and because we are in a state of erosion of international law, they actually depend on who commits the act rather than the act itself. We're not looking anymore at an attack, on a war, on interference in internal affairs, on an act of violence, but rather who is committing that act. And if that person is, or that country or that state is more powerful than the others, then yeah, it would be more justified and more okay, unfortunately. And the third key dynamic of erosion is weak international response, often reactive, fragmented, and purely declaratory, which is a rhetoric over over real implementation of international law. It's often we react and we see after conflicts what would happen. But in times of peace, there is no set of organizing how these things should happen. So the big question is, what is the impact on the international order? In complementarity to the conclusion of Elias, we are not only shifting back to certain patterns that we had before, we are shifting from a universal system of legal constraint to one that is fragmented, power-driven, and interest-based. And these three are the only drives to discuss an impact on order. And this has a very important business implication because this erosion creates lack of predictability, directly impacting global stability and global markets, which we will talk about in the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadi. Absolutely, the weakness of the response, also the attacks that we're witnessing. I mean, we saw judges being sanctioned at the ICC. We just saw 3 UNIFIL peacekeepers being killed in southern Lebanon. So obviously, and these are mandated by the Security Council since 1978. And so we can really see the power play happening there. From a European perspective, also, we see how they are unable to react and play a significant role in line with, well, its historic standing, its present rank and size. Europe today is caught in limbo with the acceleration of those strategic rifts in the recent years, starting with the war in Ukraine, even before that, and the COVID crisis. It's being outflanked by China on an industrial level. It's bullied by the US. It's actually attacked by Russia, and completely still, as wars have erupted now in the Gulf. So, Elias, back to you. I mean, Europeans are insisting it's not their war. But how will European countries be impacted if the war continues to escalate?
Yes, sure. Before entering in the real answer to this question, and just in relation to what Fadi was saying, it's very important to see that this erosion that you're talking about, Fadi, here, if we take it further, and we try to understand and to see what kind of impact this war might have on the Europeans on the long term, it's maybe mostly here is so Europe always wanted to be uh, the head of normative of the norms, the liberal norms, democracy, etc., accountability, government, that lessons learned of the World War, and the nature of the international system that was ruling since then, plus whatever they've done and achieved through the European Union and other kind of cooperation. So maybe on the long term, this might be one of the um, personally, I believe that this might be a very important impact, as and it is in relation with what Fadi was mentioning, but on a direct impact, of course, the repercussion is mainly economic, especially with the price of oil. If that got more and more like higher as Iranians anyway are promising, but the situation also on the ground and through the blockades of the Straits of Hormuz, and maybe soon also the Bab el-Mandeb with the Houthis, with the skyrocketing prices, this will have, of course, a lot of repercussions on the economy of the Europeans, who are already strained because they tried to diversify in the past their provision in energy, right? Especially trying to move away from Russia. And beyond the economic repercussion, we can see that we might have also potential political instability with the continuous rise of populism in Europe, as we've seen it in the last few decades. We can think about Hungary, but also about Italy with Meloni and other states, even in France with the extreme and the far right movements gaining into power, because they try always to give fast forward and easy solutions for the population, and these we've seen always that they have a higher popularity during crisis or during um, economic crisis that might ensure. Also, we don't have to forget that the Europeans have invested a lot in the war, the Russian war on Ukraine, and they are struggling there. So this new war might be draining, for example, the US, and on the opposite, it might be reinforcing Russia. We've seen, and we can understand that Russia seems to be one of the great winners of the current situation at the world and the war. And this is maybe the greatest nightmare of the Europeans.
Absolutely. And so the to come back to the economy, we see the EU economies, in addition to the political populism, in addition to the internal rift they are struggling with. We saw even internal resistance to the Mercosur agreement with Latin America when it comes to trade. We see them constrained with their own energy transitions that they have set for themselves. in the path of climate change. And we can see how those reforms and those passed, especially from the industry level and the energy level, they cannot keep up with the present with the present challenges. So shock after shock, they're really struggling. And as a reminder, we have to remember that everything from air transport, large-scale maritime transport, production of essential goods, all of this still depend heavily on fossil fuels. And so, how do you see this, really impacting the internal dynamics within the EU? You talked about populism, you talked about the EU, but as a foresight, for businesses, for the economies, how do you see those shocks, altering the internal dynamics of the EU institutions?
I mean, the EU has been struggling also in the past to maybe continue to legitimize its position within the citizens, right? The EU citizens all across, we've seen it a lot, but also we can from a business perspective we can always think about the productivity maybe, how much and the competitiveness of the European enterprises. But maybe here I'm not a real expert in economy, and Jean-Marie can maybe also be continuing my idea. But I really see that Europe will be struggling to try to have so to try to go away and um, strengthen the position after this war.
Exactly. And so we go to Jean-Marie and try to zoom in with the Gulf, that was seen as a cornerstone of global economic stability. It was a very strong relation with the EU, even stronger relation with the US. Also opening trade routes and supplies for China. I mean, we see with the Hormuz Strait how China is very much dependent of oil and fossil fuel and gas coming from that region. We see all Southeastern Asia also very dependent. We see the impact on the economy in India and Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So it's really a global shock, these wars on those economies. And so, as we zoom in the Gulf, we see how, from a business perspective, energy, trade corridors, financial flows, all of this was kind of given in that region, right? And really supporting a global economy that it was thriving through. So, from a business perspective, what exactly is today unraveling, and why should it matter to a company, even if it has no office in the region? Why should a company be attentive of what's happening today in those Gulf wars, and not they saying, "Oh, it's just just the other side of the world doesn't interest me."
Look, Karim, what is unraveling is an entire operating model that the global economy has relied on for decades. I will explain it a bit. The Gulf was structured around three pillars, if one take it like that. First of all, a security umbrella guaranteed by the United States, stable and predictable energy flow, energy supply for the world market, and it was an open financial environment where everyone could invest, and capital and talents from all over the world came to the Gulf, especially Emirates, that started with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia. The problem now that these pillars, the three of them, are being tested together. So in general, we have a problem in one pillar, there is a compensation. The problem is that these three pillars are being tested together, which make the problem it's structural and not cyclical. Let's take, for example, the COVID. The COVID, we had a problem with the production, with a bit of shipping. Shipping were late. But no, here it's structural. It's not cyclical. even for a company that has no office in the Gulf, let's say in Europe, let us not forget. Let us not forget that these company, in a way or another, rely on Europe. You know, if I wanted to give an example, I want to give an example. You are, for everyone to understand, you sell chocolate. But let us not forget, there is a supplier, there is tier one, the one who give you the big bulk of chocolate to make them bars. But before, there is the cacao producer and the shipper, and these one of this chain, of this logistic chain, is affected. We have a problem. So let's not talk about the energy cost. In 2022, after the Russian crisis, there was a decision, especially in Europe, to shift, but it's not done entirely, because they kept relying on the Gulf energy. And the most important, we have the institutional investors, PIF, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Emirates. They invest over, the last number, they were over $3 trillion in foreign investment, mainly in Europe, in real estate, in companies. And the problem now, with the disruption of the energy, and they will need liquidity. Will they withdraw from Europe to use this liquidity? Because let us not fool ourselves. It is true that the barrel of petrol is going up. Yeah, that's because of the war, because of the crisis. But the non-stability, non-capacity of projection. Let's take, for example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia are very happy. They create their budget based on a $90 barrel price. Now it's 120. Okay, but for how long it will stay? Uh, will they, if there is a problem on the Red Sea, will they be able to export it? Donc, the real danger, in my opinion, is the most corporate strategies were built on a basis that the Gulf will remain stable forever. So, are they ready? Are they not ready? They are failing to recognize the shift. They are now they start, as a consultant, I can say, now they start asking the real question after 1 month. So what we gonna do, or what we gonna, so it will affect all, the whole world. It's not, and let us, there is one point, very important point, that maybe we can develop after. uh, the the Hormuz passage passed from a certainty to a risk factor. This risk factor, where it will be, it will appear in insurances, it will appear in and when a company want to do the projection for you, it was a certainty. Now it's a risk factor, which is, I think, on the long run, very dangerous. Let us not forget, now we have not only a problem of, let's say, a petrol barrel. We have a problem of fertilizers that will affect the production of food for the world. We have problem of production, plastic production, because plastic, it's a petrochemical, it's a petrol. So we have a lot. This is one thing. The last thing I want to say is, if the war stops now, let's say, for example, the LNG, which Europe brought from Qatar after the problem, the liquid natural gas. Uh, so they brought it from Qatar. Qatar shut down its refinery. So they will need 1 month to start reproducing if the war stops. They will need 60 to 90 days. Sorry, 2 months and a half, or 3 months to start reproducing. So we are looking at a huge systemic disruption, not cyclic.
Exactly. I was at a conference last week, and someone, a former officer in the French army was saying how the most serious questions you want to raise when talking about crisis are the most improbable scenarios. And like you were saying, who would have thought that the Gulf could become unstable, that the Gulf could become a war zone, that the Gulf could stop, the only scenario we had in mind, like, for the past 40 years was saying that one day oil will run out, right? So one day the Gulf, and they started to diversify their economies, go into tourism, go into real estate, go into financial services. So the Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia a bit later, but trying to develop non-oil, non-fossil fuel services. And they were getting ahead with all that because that was the scenario. The most probable scenario is that those countries will eventually run out of fuel, or that the global demand will go down because of climate change and climate transitions and energy transitions, moving away from fossil fuel, which we see is not happening. And here we have a complete shift and shock that will hit not only the energy supply, but also the financial circuits, like you were mentioning, because those Gulf sovereign wealth funds, they were major investors. They are major investors in European companies, in real estate companies, in infrastructure. There are also petrodollars being used in the US economies, being used in stabilizing the dollar and stabilizing the prosperity of the US economy. And so if those, and today the Gulf is losing $1.2 billion a day, $1.2 billion, that because they cannot export their oil and gas in a normal fashion. And this is money that Europe and the US will not see, and that will be needed and to reconstruct. And so, Jean-Marie, how should boards be thinking about this? The cash flow, this turnover that was there, all those venture capitals in the Gulf that were investing in tens of billions of dollars in European economies that will not be available in the next years or so. How should boards deal with that and process that information?
Karim, as we said, the problem is this is not, as we said, a speculative scenario. This scenario should be on every CFO desk or accountant desk, depending on the on the company volume. Look, there are certain certain steps that the company could take. Let's start with the assessment. The company, what they should do, they have, in my opinion, they have three major problems. They have a legal compliance problem. They have a cash flow problem, and they have a decision-making problem. Okay, let's start with the easiest one, the decision-making problem. The problem of the companies in general, are that the decision-making process takes too long. With what's happening, and it's happening so fast, the decision cannot take 2 to 3 weeks, to be taken. Let, let me put it in a military way. In general, when you start a war, there are some decisions that should be taken by the officer on the ground. So they go out from this is one thing. So the decision process should be fast to adapt. This is one thing. Second thing, the legal and the compliance problem, especially not because of the war, because of the difference between the EU and the US. Now, a lot of companies are working in the Gulf countries. They are European companies. They follow the EU standards related to sanctions. That now the United States, what is the United States doing is putting some company under sanctions that Europe is not putting. So, okay, in this case, what should be the decision of the company? Let us not, okay. And second, you have the force majeure. Okay, there is a war. There are missiles hitting the Emirates. But can we consider ourselves in a force majeure? Can I use in my contract the force majeure? I think the force majeure is the most underestimated the clause in any in any business operation, because it's general. It's done for natural catastrophe or something like that, but it never covers war. There are business in the EU in the UAE, but where is the limitation of the force majeure? They must review the insurance, the insurance clauses. This is the big shift. This I'm talking from a legal contractual dimension. They have a lot to review. From the operational and cash flow, I think all the companies now need to at least, in general, even that if there is no war, uh, there is always a need for 90 to 120 days of cash flow reserve. So at least you will absorb the shock and you will have time to think what to do. In my opinion, they they must be friends again with their banks, because they will need they will need cash. Unfortunately for Lebanese company, they hate their banks, but I think this will be the only solution, because when you need cash, you need cash. You cannot do. The last thing I want to say about the suppliers, the diversification of suppliers, the diversification of routes. You cannot import all your energy from the Gulf country. You have to find other solutions, unfortunately. Would it be the Russians? Would it be the I would have said the East Mediterranean, but unfortunately, our situation is worse than than our friends in the Gulf. So it's a very deep. I think it's a very deep thing to we have to brainstorm about. So that's it. We can talk about the subjects for hours, but that's if you want the major points.
Definitely. And you have new routes. The Eastern Mediterranean is blocked. The Gulf is blocked. Algeria is trying
Yeah,
to take
and
some
here
opportunity.
there is something, let us not forget. The European are not feeling it yet 100% in commodities, and the commodity, because the Red Sea is they can access the Red Sea, the Suez Canal. Imagine now the Houthi decides Iran wants to, or the American want, and they want to close the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb Détroit. What will happen? What will happen? Uh, all commodities will take plus I don't know how many days to go
Three
by
weeks
South
more. Three
Africa,
weeks
Cap
more.
of
Yeah,
3 weeks.
more in general. Yeah.
You will have an issue that I think that they are pushing it. So this event will make Europe go to the war. Such an event will make Europe to go fully in the war, because it's very strategic for them.
And we see how this is impacting inflation in Europe, and inflation is impacting
Exactly.
populism, and populism is impacting electoral habits and practices. And so fueling a cycle in Europe that we are very familiar with, very authoritative ring to it. Whereas, and we listened to Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, saying, well, we know the power of states. And it's coming from a German chancellor. We understand where he comes from. He speaks of experience. He speaks from historic perspective. And so he's very much trying to mend away or fence away the temptation of going back to power politics. But Europe is
Exactly.
being crushed by all this rivalry, crushed by the shocks, crushed by the cash flow limitations, tomorrow crushed by the inflation of commodities. Now it's only the gas stations. Tomorrow it's going to be, the price of bread, maybe the simplest of items. And this obviously will be will fuel a lot of discontent in European
It's a
public
yeah, yeah.
opinions.
It's a structural problem, not a cyclic one. That's for sure. There is
No.
things will change after these events. And the problem, zero control on the time frame. We all remember when Putin started the war in Ukraine. We were betting on 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
It's
It has
a long
been
term. It's a long term.
two
It's a
years,
really
three
long term
years.
discussion or a
So
long term perspective. Let's go back
exactly.
to international law and its erosion, and one specifically on the Gulf. Fadi, how are those attacks on the Gulf a manifestation of that erosion? How are they justified? You know, in the context of war.
So what we are seeing now in the Gulf is not something super special that we have not seen before. It's not an isolated phenomenon, but it's the result of a structural weakness combined with the evolving forms of warfare that we have seen, I would say, in the past 5 years. Because at its core, we are witnessing progressive stretching of the rules of that govern the use of force, particularly through the reinterpretation of one important concept that is being overused in every conflict around the world now, which is the conflict of the concept of self-defense. We have a shift from something that international law and philosophy of the law and law and development in general have how these have defined self-defense, to a shift of a more traditional self-defense, responding to an actual or imminent attack, which are usually defined, towards a preventive and preemptive use of force, which is allowing states to justify military action based on purely speculative or future threats that they are foreseeing based on their own interpretations and their own analysis and their own finding facts. This expansion not only weakens the foundation requirement of necessity and immediacy strictly set by international humanitarian law, but also blurs the line between a lawful self-defense and an unlawful aggression. So this dynamic is further reinforced by the loophole, exploitation, and selective compliance of international law. So countries around the world, especially Iran, US, Israel, and all the others that are part of the current war, are doing something is their law shopping. So they're shopping for the best provision of the best law, international, local, regional, that will better suit their intent that they have in mind, what they want to do. So they're doing like a forum shopping of what would work better. So at the same time, the nature of that conflict we are in now is purely a proxy one. We have a rise of proxy and hybrid warfare that we are currently a part of now. And this has created a legal gray zone between peace and war altogether. States act through non-state actors, cyber operations, economic tools, and economic tools being one of them being the closing of the Strait of Hormuz now, making attribution difficult and allowing for plausible deniability for themselves. These below threshold operations are deliberately designed to avoid triggering clear legal consequences, to exploiting the binary structure of international law that struggles to regulate activities falling between war and peace. This not only undermines state sovereignty of all the states, but also sets a very dangerous precedent for the future. And it's also clearly relevant to that current conflict because states are they're invoking expansive interpretations of Article 51 of the UN Charter to justify their actions. Threats are broadly defined. The presence of military bases of strategic capabilities, as the one that was explained through the Gulf situation, is reframed as a sufficient ground for the use of force by Iran. An idea that maybe they might have nuclear weapons, which is something that they have been saying for 20 years now, was a basis to be able to attack Iran. So the consequences are not limited to the primarily parties to the conflict. Third-party states, particularly in the Gulf, have been directly affected, demonstrating how the erosion of international law altogether can spill beyond the immediate belligerents, the Gulf countries have never thought that they would be part of such conflicts. And attacks on their territory, despite their non-involvement, highlights the weakening of any foresight, legal, political, or strategic, that anyone had. When and we are sure that when Qatar asked or allowed the US to build a military base, they never thought that one day they would be facing such attacks, especially on their power plants. I mean, they could have been okay with these bases been attacked, but they have never thought that their energy power plants would have ever been part of a conflict. So, and this takes me to my final point. Targeting civilian infrastructure, including energy facilities, airports, and residential areas, reflect a very serious breach of international humanitarian law. Under the principle of proportionality, attacks are understood to be unlawful if the expected civilian harm is excessive compared to the concrete and direct military advantage. Therefore, energy installations such as Ras Laffan and Samref remain presumptively civilian objects until proven otherwise. So even if considered for a dual use, the foreseeable disruption to essential services, healthcare, water, electricity, they render definitely such attack disproportionate. So to conclude, the current conflict does not only illustrate a violation of international law, everyone knows it, even the people in the conflict, they know it, but it's causing a deeper erosion of all of the normative boundaries we have ever knew in any type of conflict, through expanded interpretations of self-defense, preemptive attacks, exploitation of legal ambiguities, the rise of hybrid warfare. States are now in this phase, and I'm going to quote Elias once again. The state of the international order of international law after this conflict in particular are not going to be the same as we knew them before this conflict. And this is something that everyone should be on the lookout to.
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's exactly where we are in the Gulf today, breaching international law voluntarily, and parties to the conflict doing so because you can, right? And there's back to the power politics, back to the absolute sovereignties, one might say today, with the rise of religiosity in the world, sacred sovereignties, that our action is the chosen action, our action is the rightful action, it is a sacred action, it is necessary, it is just, it is fair, it is quasi-messianic, in order to reach, to do good in the world, to talk like the MAGA politics. And here you have the EU, which is one of the backbones of international law, one of the drafters of international law, one of the parties that is supposed to monitor and enforce international law, because it is such important normative dimension to it. And we see it very still, very silent, very like quasi unaware of, it's so shocked that it's unable to move. We have maybe some premises from Spain that has recently forbidden the US to use its airspace for military operations. This is something that the EU countries or the EU in general could do. So when you say leverages are there, the fact that a lot of EU countries are NATO countries, and the US are using those bases, the NATO bases, in a dual way, without even referring to it as a NATO operation, but they are exploiting the NATO bases in Italy, in Germany, in Turkey, to be part of that military action and operations in Iran and in the Middle East. And it would be a provocation for the US if the EU were to forbid the US, but enacting international law principles. So we can really see the pickle the EU countries are in. So Elias, backbone of international law, financial interest, military interest, NATO interest. Where does this conflict leave the EU in the Middle East?
Yeah, exactly. You've actually tackled a few very important points here. One was mentioned just by you, that the normative power of the EU, right? has been losing its credibility within the international order, and it has now limited influence on the conflict military trajectory also, if we put it like this. And this is maybe what I would be calling maybe, without being too dramatic, but the European, the EU's tragedy, because until now it has failed to at least uh, unite itself strongly facing the rising predatory means or direction of the US from one side. We've seen it with Greenland, the idea of the annexation of Greenland or buying Greenland by the US. We've seen it elsewhere also in face of Russia also within the Ukrainian war. And then here we are in the Middle East, not to be talking about China and not to be talking also all the setbacks that it has been going that the EU and some EU countries, like France, for example, has been going through in Africa also in the past years. Um, so this is an additional step in in this kind of a strategic marginalization of the role of Europe in the worldwide security, but mainly we are talking here through the Middle East. So the Middle Eastern security, which has been totally dominated by other actors, mainly military actors, with Israel, the US, and some other actors in the past. Um, we also and this is maybe in parallel with the normative role and its erosion of the EU and the Europeans. We have the collapse of Europe's diplomatic project with Iran, right? So we are talking about what the Trump administration has been choosing is actually maybe the total opposite of what was the European way through decades, when the EU positioned itself as the primary diplomatic broker with Iran, right? Which culminated at the end in the 2015 nuclear deal. And it was also, of course, with the Obama administration, GCPOA, etc. But now the European diplomacy will be totally discredited by Tehran, and maybe the EU will be losing its mediator role, right, between Washington and Iran. It has been losing it anyway because we've seen other states like Oman and Qatar also taking up in this role in this. Of course, the economic impact, but I won't cover it again. And also back to the idea that Europe could not form like a single force. And this is maybe its biggest problem is there is real internal fragmentation within the EU. Of course, we've heard what the what the French, but also what the as Karim you were mentioning how Spain was raising its voice, etc. Germany also, but this is not a unified answer and a unified um, um, point that they are making. Europe is now maybe confined to some smaller remaining roles, mainly humanitarian and then reconstruction, and maybe further when peace will come, you will have usually the economic reconstruction and rebuilding on these of these affected areas. So yeah, unfortunately, this is how I see the situation for now.
Definitely. The EU has tremendous expertise, tremendous technology that can be transferred. We saw this with China, we saw it with the Gulf. You have tens of EU businesses in the Gulf investing, cooperating, creating partnerships, building prosperity and value for the economies there, creating virtuous cycles. But all of this is today in jeopardy because of those wars, reaching our final axis, the systemic breakdown, the business exposure, all those companies that have those exposure in the Gulf or in the wider trade routes and the energy and the supply chains. So Jean-Marie, I mean, many companies believe that, they've already tested or stress test their supply chains, especially after COVID. Elias was mentioning how this is like a repetition of COVID, and those since COVID. What makes this actual set of crisis different? Where are the blind spots for companies today? You're muted.
Yeah, Karim, let me tell you something. COVID was the stress was on demand and logistics. It was a demand and logistics shock during COVID. Factory closed, port got congested, the containers were in the wrong places. It was fundamentally a disruption of flow within an intact system. But now, what we are facing now is a potential disruption of the system itself. I explain myself: the physical infrastructure, the legal framework, and the security guarantees that enable trade to happen. They are disrupting trade, in my opinion. All these factors. Let me give you consider this difference. During COVID, the Strait of Hormuz was open. Shipping insurance was standard. Sanctions regime were stable. No one questioned whether goods could legally move from point A to point B. Now, in this conflict, all those conditions are in question in a simultaneous way. Your container can be physically rerouted, legally blocked, financially uninsurable, and on a contract level, it could be disrupted all at once. So this is one thing. There is a blind spot, like I said before. There is a critical blind spot. Post-COVID, most companies improved their understanding of tier one suppliers. As I told you, there is tier one supplier, tier two, tier three, tier four, and I gave the chocolate example. It starts with the planting of the cacao, to the shipping, to the wholesale, to the shop. Now, and very few have mastered the tier two and tier three and tier four supplier, and all the elements that I mentioned above. These uncertainties can apply on any stage of a product, the life of a product. So it starts from raw materials. So there is so many challenge to any business leader watching. This is straightforward. If you cannot name, and I always tell to my clients, and now that they are asking me about what's happening and what they do, I always tell them, before you start telling me, it is not a COVID crisis. So what the exercise that you must do before you start telling me what is the solution, uh, if you cannot name your top five Gulf exposed dependencies, because every business in the world has Gulf dependencies, and in a tier one, tier two, tier three, tier four, you will find the Gulf somewhere. We cannot start the exercise. So that's it. I think in general that's the whole difference between the COVID and the COVID wasn't structural. This is a structural event.
Definitely, and if you don't rely on your stress tests, and definitely you're in big trouble. If you refuse to do it, or refuse to see it, or refuse to do it realistically, also you're going to be in big trouble. Let's zoom in on energy because I think it's you mentioned how critically reliable all the world economy is, and societies. Today we're electrifying, with AI, you need more data centers, you need more energy. Europe and China are electrifying their cars. This also needs electricity. Electricity needs to come from somewhere. Many European countries like Germany remove the civil nuclear option from their policies. So this brings more pressure on other alternative sources of energy. For those participants among you, don't hesitate if you have questions. There's a Q&A section available for you. We'll close and we have a few more questions, and then we'll close and leave time for your questions. If you have any, you can directly type them in the Q&A section. So on energy, I have a quote from Václav Smil, who's an energy expert in Europe, who stated that it's very easy to decarbonize what can be electrified. We have those alternatives like for electric cars and all that. But alternatives are lacking, like you said, Jean-Marie, when it comes to plastic, when it comes to fertilizers meaning food security issues, cement and steel, talking about reconstruction. These are 4 pillars of modern life that are directly related to fossil fuel and is quasi inescapable when it comes to energy and fossil energy. So many European countries believe that they had reduced that Gulf dependency, that that after 2022 they had diversified. Was it a false sense of security?
Yes, in many cases, yes. The post 2022 energy diversification was real. It was a real diversification, but also it was partial. What they have done, Europe reduced the dependency on Russian gas, but they shifted to LNG imports from Qatar and liquefied natural gas. So that was the issue. Qatar now is one of Europe let's say was one of Europe most important LNG suppliers. You have no, they tried to do it, but look, to be more clear, the issue goes far beyond the direct energy procurement. Even companies that have locked in renewable energy contracts or diversified their supplies, they face second order effect. There is a second order effect. All prices that the baseline for example, for the global transport and logistics costs. For example, if you are not affected directly by the energy that you are using, you are affected by the transportation cost, plastic, as we said, packaging. All of this is look. To be honest, the honest assessment is this. You can diversify your energy sources, but you cannot fully decouple from a region that still account for roughly a third of the world crude oil. This is not logical. If you take the numbers, this is not logical. There are risks, and there is no. I don't see a solution, fast solution for it. So we have to endure. We will have to endure. And as I told you before, if Qatar wants to start the reproduction of LNG, and now the war stops, it will need between 90 and 120 days, so they can reproduce. So, and it doesn't seem that things are going to end soon.
Talking about business resilience, you talked extensively on the risks. We saw the impact on international law. We saw how it impacted populism inside Europe. But there are also opportunities, right? If you want to look at it from a business perspective, you have opportunities for businesses to position themselves correctly. I've come across an interview of Vincent Clerc. Vincent Clerc is the CEO of a shipping company, Maersk, as you know. He announced in an interview recently that investments in logistics are going to be enormous over the next 15 to 20 years. So there's what logistics is, and you touched upon it, Jean-Marie, a bit. Logistics is one of those sectors where, we've seen Amazon already positioning itself. We've seen other shipping companies positioning themselves, finding alternative routes, to finding deals with their insurance companies to go beyond the force majeure clauses. So if a company today, watches this webinar and wants to take concrete actions and find opportunities, what would you tell them?
Well, for this company, I would say what I always say to my clients, you have steps to take. Let's start step one, map your exposure. Know what you have. Where your client based, for example. Where your client based? Are they affected, not affected? Stress test your cash flow. This is very important. And audit your contract and insurance. As we talked before, the problem is structural. So it should be, even on a business level, it should be within the structure. There is no hope. There are no opportunities. Yes, there is opportunities, in my opinion, because the market share is reshuffling. The company that are prepared will take the place of the companies they were not prepared. That's very easy. That's the 1 + 1 = 2 in business and economics.
101 101.
No.
Business 101.
Yes, you don't act accordingly, you will lose the opportunity. You will lose the opportunity. Automatically, the client will go to a more secure place. So more secure place, I don't know, Africa, South America, I don't know. That's we are still inside the inside the party. Who's gonna
Storm.
pay?
Yeah.
Who's gonna pay
Still
the
in the eye
bill
of the
at the
storm.
end?
Yeah.
We don't know. So, but there is a lot of opportunities that can be drawn from the situation for businesses.
Yeah. Those who draw the vision.
Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know. This is
Yeah.
everyone
Those who can
has
draw a
to
vision, who can go beyond the horizon.
exactly. You
Those
can
will be
look.
the winners.
And hopefully businesses in the Gulf, everywhere in the world, will understand that they should be prepared. I always tell to my clients, the cost of preparedness is always less than the cost of surprise. Invest in being ready. Invest in being ready. These are the businesses that will pass the crisis.
It's 1 to 10. Ratio is 1 to 10. It will cost you 10 times more to fix
Exactly.
if you're not prepared.
And you know,
there is an
equation. There is an equation, Karim, on what
equation,
and what will cost and not being ready, what will cost you.
Definitely. And that's the opportunity. We're starting to have questions. We're drawing towards the end of our discussion. We have a question of our fellow Ward. But let me say a few words on the work of GDI Conseil, especially when it comes to opportunities, especially when it comes to preparedness, to business resilience. So we prepared the strategic crisis navigation package. It's designed specifically for executive teams to face those major geopolitical shifts, rifts, and risks that we are all enduring today. This strategic package, it includes a 36-page report. You have 4 probabilistic scenarios that with the measurable monitoring indicators in them, a CEO decision tree, a crisis monitoring framework. It could be weekly, daily, whichever you choose. Confidential executive briefing. There's an executive teaser that was prepared. You can find it on the website of GDI-Conseil.eu. It will draw the methodology. It will explain the key components. We're available as a team to discuss it with, if you're a corporate advisor or have corporate responsibilities or business leader, or you want to dig in more into those business risks and opportunities. GDI Conseil is the place where to discuss. Because we're agile, we're flexible, we have, as you can see, really understood the foresight of and the complexity of such and how systemic those crises are, especially for businesses worldwide, and specifically for Europe, which Europe is really caught between the Russians, the US, and the Chinese. You can really see how Europe is struggling today at all levels. We have a question by Wad Vlubergs. Many thanks on those insightful comments and risks. Question is about the long-term consequences on the current reconfigurations. The brazen actions of US and Israel may be interest-driven and rooted in hard power hegemony, like we said, but that is now. My intuition tells me that this brutal aggression will one day backfire spectacularly. That's interesting. What can we say about the long-term effects of these wars? Who are the main winners, the main losers? Any sectors, actors more likely to be affected than others? Elias, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what, and aggression will be one day backfiring, but I don't know how far this moment is from us now, because we're seeing all the opposite going on now. At the end, we are not fortune tellers. We don't know what will happen in the future. But what we see for now is that we have, from one side, a US society which is more and more divided, deeply divided, with a lot of extremisms from both sides, with all these bubbles that were created also by social media, algorithm, etc. Everyone is living, there is no real discussion, and the hatred is growing. This is for the US, and we've seen also how deep state and all the other I mean, all the other lobbies also are working there and trying to reach some. So this is for the US, and for Israel. I mean, yeah, it's also a fact that this society is getting more and more radicalized, right? More and more religious. The religious wings are more getting into power, and they just passed the law again on death penalty for Palestinians. So they reintroduced the death penalty. We've seen that all over the spectrum within Israel, we don't call it anymore as being West Bank, it's Judea, Samaria. So there is this will of predation and of integration and messianic view that for now, of course, is still running. We don't know how long, until when, and how it will backfire. It will certainly backfire. I mean, if we see history, how it unfolds, but it might not be in the near or mid future. And this is my modest opinion about it. But I'm sure Fadi, Jean-Marie, you, Karim, you might have different opinions on this.
Well, trying to draw on who's going to be winner and losers, definitely when you look at it from the heights of religiosity in the world, like we mentioned earlier. I mean, André Malraux, the former French Minister of Culture, he had already warned us back in 1946 that the 21st century would be religious or would not be, and we are really living this thoroughly in the cradle of all three monotheism, which is Palestine and the Middle East. So you can really see how this region is really strategic from a religious perspective, from a strategic perspective, from a geopolitical perspective, with the Straits, the Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, energy supply, food security, and also when you talk about war, I have a question for Fadi. When it comes to when the dust will settle, Usually when there's a winner and a loser, you ask for reparations, right? We today saw a question to the White House about who will be paying for the war, and the US is already, trying to gear
And they're saying
together
that the
the
Gulf will be
idea
paying for the
that
war.
exactly, we already know who will be paying for the war already for their own security, like they're making Europe paying for NATO. And it's interesting when you look at the latest grids of NATO. Even France is above 2%. So the 2% threshold of NATO, for the first time ever, everybody is above 2%, France being 2.05%, and Poland is the number one, close to 5%. Nobody reached 5%, which is the next threshold that Trump wants to reach. And so what about reparations, Fadi? When in these kinds of conflicts, what does international law, where does international law stand when it comes to reparations?
So international law is very resilient when it comes to reparations, but it also, as I said from the beginning, it's very operationally fragile. It's the principles are there, they are recognized, but then the difficulty comes when we talk about application. Reparation international law operates at multiple levels. So we have state reparations, we have individual reparations, and most importantly and more increasingly have corporate reparations, each providing a pathway to accountability, albeit limitations. So at the state level, we talk usually about the more traditional ones, the ones that we know the most, the ICJ, the Security Council, the UN, where these forums to which the states can go for recognition of responsibility, cessation of wrongful acts, and compensation of material damage, especially when we're talking about the ICJ. But again, we talk about the issue of enforcement, which relies purely on political will and purely on whether the states wants to comply or not. I'm not going to go over individual mechanisms because we don't have time, but I really want to focus on the reparations and responsibilities of businesses during war. The ability of businesses to seek reparations is fundamentally linked to the principle that international law provides the stability necessary for prosperity, which in turn fosters business growth, which is something very important. But in return, businesses also have to be compliant towards international law. And their role is increasingly central as economic stability and legal predictability are foundational to global markets. So we talk about an emerging, no longer, I don't think we even call it emerging anymore. Corporate responsibility has been there for 2 decades now as a strong and more stronger concept that is very, very important at the moment, because businesses, particularly the ones in the arms sector, have a duty to avoid contributing to violations of international humanitarian law, including the breaches of the Geneva Conventions. And when we're talking about businesses breaching international humanitarian law, we're talking about businesses not only not providing arms, not supplying intelligence, not participating in any way whatsoever towards any breach of international humanitarian law. Otherwise, they have a very direct risk to liability. Companies that knowingly or negligently supply weapons, armory, intelligence, capacity to people participating in a violation of international law may face legal, financial, and reputational consequences, which we're seeing is happening everywhere, especially in Europe, towards companies that are directly financing Israel. So states seeking full reparation may increasingly extend accountability to corporate actors, and this is something that we will be seeing, I believe, in the next 5 years, either through the domestic course, which is already happening in France, in Belgium, in Switzerland, in Spain, but also through emerging international forums that will be available for these reparations.
Definitely. And in Europe, lately, I can think of 2 cases of business liability of global proportion. One is Lafarge, the cement factory back in Syria and Daesh controlled, and BNP Paribas also when it comes to financing terrorism and arms supply, which has been really slapped very hard recently by US courts. So these are 2 cases you might want to be following Those watching us and more are likely to come with these wars in the next decades to come. We have a couple of minutes left. I want to ask Jean-Marie, coming back to business resilience, business compliance. I mean, how do you convince a skeptical board, about the stress tests, about the need of being prepared, about the need of having a backup plan, about the need of looking at business resilience from a serious perspective? We know how boards can be, and you mentioned it earlier, not that
A heavy
agile.
machine.
How do you convince them?
Look, Karim, let me tell you something. Not to be sarcastic, but after the end of this war, they will be convinced alone that they will have there is no better teacher than experience. So that's one thing. Look, what I can say that now, as I told you before, after 1 month, they start coming to seek for solutions because now they realize that it's going to be a long-term issue. Even if the bomb stops tomorrow, we will have for 2 or 3 years to go back to our initial the way it was before the war on an economic level, on a regulation level. So I don't think they will need. There are a difference between corporation and there is always differentiation between family businesses and big companies and especially if one to say, let's say, to give the example of the family businesses in Lebanon, this generational gap, you cannot convince them. They will tell you passed the civil war, everything went great. We were always ready. European EU, they are searching seriously for solutions. They are searching even for, yeah, I know it through my public client. They are searching very seriously for alternatives from the Gulf, let's say, Gulf region. They are going back to Africa, West Africa, South America. A new idea, because the Gulf, the advantage of the Gulf was the easy cash flow. You go, you make your deal, you execute, you get your money, and you come back. It was easy for them, which make them a bit, let's say, not very proactive in searching for new opportunities. Now they are searching again for new opportunities. So I think I will not need to convince them. They are already searching for solutions. And when they come to us, is when they know they need the solutions. They come, for example, for GDI to ask for a solution. I know there is a problem. I know I need a solution. GDI, please help me for this solution. So.
And the quest begins, exactly. We have reached the end of our webinar. Thank you all who attended. Thank you for the viewers and for your interest. You can follow us on LinkedIn. You can subscribe on the GDI Conseil YouTube channel. GDI stands for Géopolitiques et Développement International Conseil. It's foresight and strategic advisory consultancy firm with very sharp minds at the helm. So you can find us on the social media. You can find us on our website, gdi-conseil.eu. And as you can see, we are back to imperial times, the harsh imperial times, harsh power, harsh realities, realpolitik in the darkest sense. And we have to be prepared for this, and we have to face this new reality from not only a business perspective, but also from a multidimensional and holistic perspective as individuals and as collectivities. Thank you again. Thank you, Elias. Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, Jean-Marie, for your time and making this webinar possible. You'll find other opportunities, dear viewers, on our YouTube channels with other sharp analysis, other videos that will be coming through your way very soon if you subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice evening.